Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining our special program. Our names are Szilárd and Nora Ágoston. I'm a third-generation Seventh-day Adventist. My wife converted from the Baptist Church to Adventism many years ago. We are co-editing and co-directing a small ministry called Everything About the Bible and Beyond. Basically, we established this ministry a few months ago with a special purpose in God's work to reach out mainly Hungarian people in Hungary and all around the world. We would like to share a lot of interesting and valuable information about the Bible as well as biblical prophecies and their explanations, archaeological context and signs of the times. We will also look at physical and mental health and the impact of the current state of our world on society. Our goal is that those who have not yet had access to materials on similar topics can, in the possession of the new knowledge, supplement already known biblical truth to make better personal decisions that determine their daily and eternal destiny. My wife is a teacher. She deals with the very young ones, which is a very challenging work, especially in this new COVID era. The pupils struggle a lot to keep up, which is virtually impossible. Myself is a surgical first assistant and orthopedic scrub nurse. I work for a very busy place in London. This is a mission impossible as well. We have about 2.5 years growing backlog of planned major orthopedic surgeries such as hip and knee replacement because of COVID-19 crisis. Furthermore, we are both very keen on healthy living, diversity of exercises, and whole plant-based nutrition, basically on all aspects of healthy lifestyle according to the 8 principles of healthy life. We are always ready to help to advise people with biblical truth and health-centered guidance where need arises. I work with very nice Christian brothers and sisters. We have a lot of opportunity to talk about God, the everlasting gospel, and current events. God also gave me opportunity to share Ellen G. White books among my colleagues such as Steps to Christ, Desire of Ages, and The Great Controversy. But I saw the Christ Object lessons on the table in the recovery room as well. I didn't give the book to anyone. See how God is working. We are partners with someone's particular project and still working together. There is a ministry called Advent Books directed by Jonathan Bennett. Please have a look on his website and the work what he has been doing since 16 years of age. He is distributing leaflets with voluntary workers and Royal Mail Postal Service to put in letterboxes. After that, if someone was interested, can order the book The Great Controversy completely free. Initially, our family supported his ministry in helping to print Ellen G. White books to share them in the United Kingdom and in Africa. Later, we started to help personally in distributing of leaflets of Great Controversy book also. Unfortunately, Seventh-day Adventist people in the United Kingdom, apart from honorable exceptions, are not very committed to do this type of evangelism work. That made us profoundly sad. Brother Jonathan Bennett always seeking some enthusiastic people to spread these leaflets in their local area. We were more than happy and committed to join this work a few years ago. That project was mainly my wife's work, but several times I joined her to share the Great Controversy leaflets and put them into people's letterboxes. The work was blessed, expanded by God's help, and we were able to deliver these leaflets to every household in the city of Chelmsford except 2 districts. In terms of population, about 174,000 people live here. Only COVID-19 could stop us, but we believe that the work will be resumed in the unfinished districts. As the time was being, we started the distribution with our family member in another smaller town and is still going on. When COVID-19 stopped us, we were seeking new opportunities of evangelism, using the advantage of the current situations in our world. we started our own ministry, as we mentioned earlier. Why we are sharing all this information with you, my friends, now? Because we are very grateful to our Heavenly Father, who opened the doors in front of us in various fields of evangelism. We are only a couple, but do not underestimate what God can do if you combine your will and work with His almighty power. Initially, we started to share some materials on the internet on our friend's YouTube channel in 2018 and carried out the work in our ministry since October 2020. The topics we were and we are dealing with mainly connected to end-time issues, signs of times, revival and reformation, health message, and COVID-19 as well. Our sources were the ministries you could see in this program's intro, alongside with daily news from the mainstream and non-mainstream media, Vatican news, and professional healthcare literature. Most of our videos, translation and podcast, especially the early ones, had to face complete rejection or strong criticism, regardless we were dealing with signs of times, health issues, Vatican news, archaeology, or whatever. This situation didn't really discourage us, because we knew that to warn people for the coming crisis, it wasn't very popular among the Seventh-day Adventists, neither today. Never ever in the history of Adventism was a silence like now, but there are ignorance, negligence, worldliness, ecumenism, immorality, lack of temperance, and participations with the forces of the enemy. There is no doubt the historical Adventism is facing the biggest ever crisis ahead, whether we want to see or not. The sifting has started many years ago and is accelerating. Apart from some honorable exceptions, not many Adventist church leaders and members want to recognize that and put themselves and their churches in order in accordance with what is coming. In the last 6 years, we could see a lot of negative changes within the walls, and more enemy forces are consolidating outside the wall. But fortunately, there are some faithful watchmen on the wall giving a certain distinct sound with their trumpet and trying to wake up God's people. Whatever they are saying about current events such as signs of times, papacy, Sunday law, COVID-19 issues, health issues, I have to say that, officially, most of the leaders and churches put the watchmen in conspiracy theory category and try to eliminate their warning messages. Most of the Adventist churches, apart from a few exceptions, unions ones and self-supported ones, are in coma and not reacting to the importance of the issues or the warning coming from the watchmen. In Hungary, but pretty much the same all around the world, in the last 3 years we didn't hear a single statement apart from the watchmen in accordance to that, like yes, these events could lead to the final crisis, or even warning signs from God, who wants to show us what lies ahead. So, what can we hear and cannot hear then in our churches? There is no present truth sounding from the pulpit, or very rare. There are no current events to put in the context. There is no Sunday law in the pipeline. The Laudato Si is not about Sunday worship and will not lead to the mark of the beast. There is no connection between the climate crisis and the impending Sunday law. Do not mess up with the papacy. Do not wake up the sleeping lion. Hold on a minute. Excuse me, please. I have to stop here and ask. Which lion is more powerful? The lion of Babylon or the lion from Judah? There is no platform for dress, music or Sabbath reform. Just barely can be heard anything from the spirit of prophecy. Oh yes, sorry. I know since 2015 Ellen G. White and her works does not belong to the category highest authority. Therefore, we cannot mention her writings as equal to the Bible. But she was a chosen vessel of God. We can prove that from the Bible. We are Adventist. We have to have the spirit of prophecy, whose work is equivalent to the work of any other prophet in the Bible, if not the most important, because her ministry was and is connected to the time period when God will close the entire human history as we know, as far, and a completely new chapter will begin in the eternity. Christ is coming soon, but his coming is not even at the door, is not imminent. What a shame. We changed that as the people of Laodicea. Oh, another issue since 2015. So, we condemn people who are referring to prophetic time or literal time and mark them as a time setters because Jesus said, sworn by him, there should be time no longer. But the same Jesus said that to the people of Laodicea, especially to us. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. He is even at the door. But we say that, no, he is not at the door. What a bold hypocrisy. There is no publicity for the beast, the mark of the beast, the second beast revealed in Revelation, the 13th chapter. Do not talk about from the pulpit, only privately in face-to-face evangelism. The inclusive capitalism, the Great Reset, the Francesco economy, the Fratelli Tutti are not the possible components of the enormous economic and geopolitical organizations is taking shape in front of our very eyes, and we can read about its collapse in the book of Revelation, chapter 18. The COVID-19 policies will not help to implement climate change lockdowns and other measures to combat climate change. Put your mask on, keep your mouth shut, don't ask anything, don't say anything, just follow the rules. No health message can be heard apart from a few exceptions. To trust in God's protection and adhere to the 8 principles of the healthy living will not prevent you from the COVID-19 pestilence. If you brought anything forward like this, even with Ellen G. White quotation, you would be a hopeless conspiracy theorist. If you do not take the vaccine, you are vaccination denial and you go against one of the principles of the healthy living. Well, I couldn't figure out which one is from the 8, but I'm not a theologist, not a pastor, even not an Adventist assistant professor, the one who said that. These are the thoughts have preoccupied our mind in a recent month, alongside some other issues, such as moving to the countryside and to be ready all the time, because it's one thing probation will close for the Seventh-day Adventists first, but can close for anyone, anytime, if somebody died. And if happened, there will be no further opportunity for us to repent and to be saved. Surprisingly, I was listening quite a few sermons nowadays from Andrew Hendricks, David Gates and Walter White related these topics. Death can come anytime. Prepare to meet God. If something good happens, it's coming from God. If something bad happens, God permitted that. We wanted to spend more time with our ministry to expand the activity and improve the quality. Translate more sermons, put together more programs to help and warn the people. We prayed and fasted for that. But we also knew we needed to finish our mountain refuge in the beautiful Hungarian mountainous countryside. We needed time for both works. If you do one work that requires sacrifice on the other side, which is more important? What has got the highest priority? All these things have burdened our hearts. On the 11th of June 2020, Friday, I arrived home from work on time. I was hesitating between two things to do: to carry on and continue working on my latest project, the New Start health program, or go for an invigorating exercise after the long week. I had a look on my watch. 2.5 hours before Sabbath. Let's go for a ride, I thought, and I will work on the project another hour. My wife wasn't very keen to come with me. She didn't sleep enough previous night and just wanted to have a little nap before the sunset. Even though I felt tired and a little bit worn out, I started to put my cycle clothes, shoes, helmet, and glasses on. I remember for every movement. It was like a slow motion. I felt that, but I didn't really understand. I looked like this, but with a long sleeve version of the cycling jersey. Well protected and visible. I usually listen to something when I do exercise. I found a sermon from Stephen Wolberg, White Horse Media, The 7 Blessings in the Book of Revelation. It sounded pretty good. I never thought about why exactly 7 blessings there are. I started to listen that, sit on my bike and left home. I didn't know that I was not able to finish the sermon on that particular day. Everything was very quiet. No traffic on the roads. Everybody was at home or in the pubs. The whole Europe was preparing the first public event since COVID-19 started, the Eurocup 2020 Football Championship. Let me tell you, friends, what happened, but very briefly, because this program, even with my experience and testimony, is not about me, but God's grace, love, and protecting power. I was cycling on a road, and 200 yards before I wanted to turn to the countryside, I was hit by a car and ended up on the road. It wasn't my fault, but I couldn't avoid that. I suffered a mild type 1 elbow fracture on the radial head area. No surgical procedure needed, just physiotherapy, which is extremely painful. It will be healed within 6 weeks. Furthermore, I have a neck of femur fracture, which resulted a detached femoral head inside the articular capsule in my left hip. The hip has been successfully operated. I can't use my left leg for 8 weeks, and further X-ray needs to be done. If everything will be alright, then I gradually will build up walking again. Despite my broken hip has been fixed by 3 screws, there is a severe threat remained up to 1 year and is very serious. There is a possibility the blood supply will not be sufficient enough to heal the femoral head, and the 2 parts screwed together will never unite again properly. It means the head could shrink, and if happened, it would go into atrophy. This result would be life-changing in my age, a total hip replacement. But I am optimistic. If it was going to heal nicely, God would permit that. If it was not going to heal, God would permit also. Whatever will happen, I will accept, and I will go along with that because I will remain in His merciful hands. The most important thing is I am alive. Praise the Lord. Our merciful, loving, caring Heavenly Father sent His powerful angels, and they protected me from bigger injury or death. He didn't let me to be crippled or destroyed by the evil. Thank you, my Lord. That was a body. Let's see the spiritual and the mind aspects. As I was tracking back the events and my thoughts before and around the accident, I worked it out, and I have to say that I know exactly why God has allowed to happen. First of all, God wanted to ensure me about His everlasting love and protection. Furthermore, I wasn't ready to go. Not yet. I wasn't fully converted. God has planned for me in my family, my working place, my neighborhood, and His work, even in our small ministry. God gave me more time to build better relationship with Him and my family. God wanted to teach me for this. Take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat or what ye shall drink, not yet for your body, what ye shall put on. Is not the life more than meat, and the body than raiment? But seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. In my aspect, that means if I was instructed to go forward with His work, and this way I needed to sacrifice something He said is important too, God's work should come first, and He is going to provide the resources for the other issues to be solved. Let me put this very important last one in the biblical standpoint. We all remember from the Bible when the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. Once they arrived at the river of Jordan, what happened? How they were able to cross over the river. Let's see some quotations from the patriarchs and prophets. Arise had been the first message of God to Joshua. Go over this Jordan, you and all these people, unto the land which I do give to them. No instruction was given as to the way in which they were to make the passage. Joshua knew, however, that whatever God should command, he would make a way for his people to perform, and in this faith, the intrepid leader at once began his arrangements for an advance. Leaving their encampment in acacia groves of Shittim, the host descended to the border of the Jordan. All knew, however, that without divine aid, they could not hope to make the passage. At this time of the year, in the spring season, the melting snows of the mountains had so raised the Jordan that the river overflowed its banks, making it impossible to cross at the unusual fording places. God willed that passage of Israel over the Jordan should be miraculous. At the appointed time began the onward movement, the ark borne upon the shoulders of the priest leading the van. The people had been directed to fall back, so that there was a vacant space of more than a half a mile about the ark. All watched with a deep interest as the priest advanced down the bank of the Jordan. They saw them with the sacred ark move steadily forward toward the angry, surging stream, till the feet of the bearers were deep into the waters. Then suddenly the tide above was swept back, while the current below flowed on, and the bed of the river was laid bare. At the divine command, the priest advanced to the middle of the channel and stood there while the entire host descended and crossed to the farther side. Thus was impressed upon the minds of all Israel the fact that the power that stayed the waters of Jordan was the same that had opened the Red Sea to their fathers 40 years before. When the people had all passed over, the ark itself was borne to the western shore. The sooner had it reached a place of security, and the soles of the priest's feet were lifted up onto the dry land, than the imprisoned waters, being set free, rushed down a resistless flood in the natural channel of the stream. Wonderful, isn't it? But what is the connection to us and my story? The answer is very simple. We also know from the Bible, if someone became a Christian and surrendered to God, also became spiritually Jew in Christ. We became the chosen people of God, so as the literal Israelites were, we are the spiritual Israelites, now with all the advantages and responsibilities also. How do we know that? There are several texts in the Bible, but probably the most powerful evidence we can read is from 1 Peter 2:18. But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should shew forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Let's draw a straight line between them and us. Since the New Testament and ongoing, everybody who is in Christ is chosen for a royal priesthood. You don't need to be qualified to call out people out of darkness into his marvelous light. You don't need to be a theologist or pastor. You are the part of the priesthood. Jesus qualified you already. That is the good news. But there is a burden, a burning responsibility comes with that as well. The priests who held the Ark of the Covenant with the law of God on their shoulders, they went forward and stepped into the stormy water of Jordan with faith, as God instructed. As they stepped into the stormy water, God opened a safe passage for the people and the priests also. We just need to do exactly the same thing. We need to share the word of God, take the yoke of the service and go forward with faith, helping to ensure a safe passage for the people of the world into the promised land, the heavenly Canaan. We are priests, all of us. Some of us better qualified, some of us less qualified, but we can be trained better and fit for some kind of service in God's work. We feel the burden, the responsibility, and the need of the world for evangelism, and we have the law, the word of God with us. Let's go and move forward. God has instructed us, so we need to obey. He is going to lead and help us. Please stay with this story in the biblical Adventist standpoint and just think together. What is the historical parallel between Israelites' history and the history of the Seventh-day Adventist people? Let's go back in time 40 years. The Israelites arrived at the border of the Promised Land, Canaan, for the first time. The spies ventured out and returned with fruits of the land and some news. 2 good reports and 10 bad reports. The 10 bad reports were described disproportionately, so much that resulted unbelief among the Israelites. If only the 2 men had brought the evil report, and all the 10 had encouraged them to possess the land in the name of the Lord, they would still have taken the advice of the 2 in preference to the 10, because of their wicked unbelief. But there were only 2 advocating the right, while 10 were on the side of rebellion. We all know the story. Finally, they wanted to stone Joshua and Caleb, and God had to intervene. The 10 unfaithful spies, divinely smitten by the plague, perished before the eyes of all Israel, and in their fate the people read their own doom. They heard a judgment from God about the 40 years wandering in the wilderness. They were to face the punishment. They're not going to be the part of the remnant who is going to enter the Canaan 40 years later. They realized what they have done, but remained rebellious and paid a heavy price for their disobedience when they clashed with the enemy. Joshua and Caleb were the only 2 faithful spies who brought back a good report and believed that God would help them succeed. They were the only men from their generation permitted to go into the promised land 40 years later. Why did the Israelites need to go through all of these? Because of their unbelief. They refused to go into the promised land. Please remember for this word, unbelief. Let's see what happened with the Seventh-day Adventists in the 19th century. Apart from some exceptions, they widely rejected the message in 1888, and they refused to enter the promised land, the heavenly Canaan. Ellen G. White wrote that around the end of the 19th century. If they had accepted the 1888 message, God would have finished the work with them all around the world within 2 years. Can you imagine that? Within 2 years, without internet. Why couldn't God finish the work with them? Because of their unbelief. Do we have a promise? We will go in for the second time. Certainly we do. Did the Israelites have the promise they were going into the promised land? Yes, they did. So what happened when the Israelites arrived at the border of Canaan for the second time, just right before they wanted to enter? Let's read what the spirit of prophecy says about the situation. On the eastern side of Jordan, between the river and the high tableland which they had been traversing, was also a plain several miles in width and extending some distance along the river. This sheltered valley had the climate of tropics. Here flourished the shittim or acacia tree, giving the plain the name Vale of Shittim. It was here that the Israelites encamped, and in the acacia groves by the riverside they found an agreeable retreat. These surroundings exerted a polluting influence upon the Israelites. Their minds became familiar with the vile thoughts constantly suggested. Their life of ease and inaction produced its demoralizing effects, and almost unconsciously to themselves, they were departing from God and coming into a condition where they would fall on easy prey to temptation. At first, there was little intercourse between the Israelites and their heathen neighbors, but after a time, Midianish women began to steal into the camp. Their appearance excited no alarm, and so quietly were their plans conducted that the attention of Moses was not called to the matter. It was the object of these women, in their association with the Hebrews, to seduce them into transgression of the law of God, to draw their attention to heathen rites and customs, and lead them into idolatry. These motives were studiously concealed under the garb of friendship, so that they were not suspected even by the guardians of the people. Those who would have conquered their enemies in battle were overcome by the wiles of heathen women. The people seemed to be infatuated. The rulers and the leading men were among the first to transgress, and so many of the people were guilty that the apostasy became national. Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor. When Moses was aroused to perceive the evil, the plots of their enemies had been so successful that not only were the Israelites participating in the licentious worship at Mount Peor, but the heathen rites were coming to be observed in the camp of Israel. The Israelites, who could not be overcome by the arms or by the enchantments of Midian, fell a prey to her harlots. Such is the power that woman, enlisted in the service of Satan, has exerted to entrap and destroy souls. She hath cast down many wounded, yea, many strong men have been slain by her. Please listen carefully now. All along, through the ages, there are strewn wrecks of character that have been stranded upon the rocks of sensual indulgence. As we approach the close of time, as the people of God stand upon the borders of the heavenly Canaan, Satan will, as of old, redouble his efforts to prevent them from entering the goodly land. He lays his snares for every soul. It is not the ignorant and uncultured merely that need to be guarded. He will prepare his temptations for those in the highest positions, in the most holy office, if he can lead them to pollute their souls, and he can through them destroy many. The judgments visited upon Israel for their sin at Shittim destroyed the survivors of the vast company who nearly 40 years before had incurred the sentence. Only the remnant of the remnant entered the promised land. Do we know any similar situation connected to Jesus' second coming from the Bible? Yes, we do. The parable of the 10 virgins. Only the remnant of the remnant could go in and participated in the wedding. Do we see the parallel? We can see that what happened with the Israelites twice at the border of Canaan. And we can see what happened with the Seventh-day Adventists at the end of the 19th century. That is history, facts, and probably we all agree on that either. God will lead his people, the Seventh-day Adventists, alongside with his other people called out from different churches into the promised land, the heavenly Canaan. Did anything happen in the Adventists' history, spiritually, after the 1900, which indicates the similarity with the history of the Israelites before they entered the promised land? Yes, it did, in the 1950s and the 1980s, when we got started closer relationship with the apostate Protestant churches, the ecumenism, and the Vatican. Nowadays, the collaboration is literally blooming and exerts its rotting effect. Let me to make this more obvious using biblical symbols. The Lord is the bridegroom and the pure church is the bride. Once they got married, united, they are husband and wife, aren't they? So, if any pure church, including the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who is in the marriage with the Lord and followed the recognized truths, tried to unite on obscure doctrines, goals, or movements with any other church and let destructive influence to sneak in, they would commit spiritual adultery. And that exactly happened with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, with the church whose duty is to wake up the entire humanity, to tell the world the nearness of Jesus' second coming, and call the people out of Babylon. Can we see the parallel now? When did it happen in the Israelite situation? Just right before they entered the promised land. When did it happen with the Seventh-day Adventists? Oh, it started almost 70 years ago, and Jesus still didn't come. Yes, he didn't come yet, and we are sinking into the swamp in a sleeping, frozen state. But who is going to drain the swamp? How far are we from the promised land? We are far. Most of the people, they are sleeping and slumbering. A lot of them would say. So let's wake them up then. Where are we standing in the stream of time parallel with the Israelites' journey? What happened since we committed spiritual adultery in the 1950s? Did we get any warnings from God we shouldn't have ignored? Is there anything happening around us indicates that God is close to lose the winds and the birth pain has already started many years ago? Where are we as prophetic people heading? And where is the humanity heading? As a matter of fact, Pastor David Gay was right on many aspects, and he wasn't alone with his view. Did he and the people they shared his view make a mistake? They did, some say. Or they didn't. Just God was merciful and wanted to warn the people, like with his faithful servant William Miller. The Sunday law didn't come. Not yet. Thanks to God. He is patient. We weren't ready, and we are still not ready. Did anything significant happen in 2015 and 2019, which can lead to the Sunday law? Yes, definitely. Pastor David Gates also emphasized another interesting statement, and the people disputed that as well. He stated that God was warning his faithful people every 7th year and tracked it back to 2001. Actually, he was absolutely right, but didn't go back far in history. Probably with purpose. He is not a surface reader man. Our research will go back and will show what happened in every 7th year up to now and what we can expect in 2022 potentially without being a time setter. As we mentioned, something very important happened in the history of Adventism in the 1950s. There were no crises happened between the Second World War and 1966. But since 1966, everything has been changed. From 1966, there were crises every consecutive 7th year. 1966, the so-called credit crunch of 1966 has long been recognized as the first significant post-war financial crisis and one of the required the first important intervention by the Federal Reserve Bank. 1973 oil crisis. The 1973 oil crisis began in October 1973 when the members of the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, led by Saudi Arabia, proclaimed an oil embargo. The embargo was targeted at the nations perceived as supporting Israel during the Yom Kippur War. 1980. The early 1980s recession was a severe economic recession that affected much of the world between approximately the start of 1980 and early 1983. It is widely considered to have been the most severe recession since World War II. A key event leading to the recession was the 1979 energy crisis, mostly caused by the Iranian Revolution, which resulted in a disruption to the global oil supply, which saw oil prices rising sharply in 1979 and early 1980. 1987. The first contemporary global financial crisis unfolded in the autumn of 1987 on a day known infamously as Black Monday. A chain reaction of market distress sent global stock exchanges plummeting in a matter of hours. In the United States, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 22.6% in a single trading session, a loss that remains the largest one-day stock market decline in history. In 1994, the Mexican peso crisis was a currency crisis sparked by the Mexican government's sudden devaluation of the peso against the dollar in December 1994, which became one of the first international financial crises ignited by capital flight. Capital flight is the large-scale exodus of financial assets and capital from a nation due to events such as political or economic instability, currency devaluation, or the imposition of capital controls. 2001. Terror attack on the 11th of September against the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, war in the Middle East, and financial crisis in Argentina, America, and worldwide. The 2001 recession was an 8-month economic downturn that began in March and lasted through November. While the economy recovered in the fourth quarter of the year, the impact lingered and the national employment continued to climb, reaching 6% in June 2003 in the United States. The 9/11 attack worsened the downturn. The markets closed for several days after the attacks, and the New York Stock Exchange did not reopen until 17th of September 2001. 2008. The financial crisis of 2008, also known as the global financial crisis, was a severe worldwide economic crisis. Prior to the COVID-19 recession in 2020, it was considered by many economists to have been the most serious financial crisis since 1929-33, the Great Depression. It occurred despite the efforts of the Federal Reserve and the United States Department of Treasury. The crisis led to the Great Recession, where housing price dropped more than the price plunge during the Great Depression. 2 years after the recession ended, unemployment was still above 9%. That doesn't count those discouraged workers who had given up looking for a job. Before we continue with the events of 2015, let me share something with you that seemingly doesn't belong to the subject we are dealing with, but it apparently does.
For people in the United States, an extraordinary series of lunar eclipses is about to begin. The action starts on April 15th, when the full moon passes through the amber shadow of Earth, producing a midnight eclipse visible across North America. That night marks the beginning of a lunar eclipse tetrad, a series of 4 consecutive total eclipses occurring at 6-month intervals. The total eclipse of April 15th, 2014, will be followed by another on October 8th, 2014, and another on April 4th, 2015, and another on September 28th, 2015. The most unique thing about the 2014-2015 tetrad is that all of them are visible for all or parts of the USA, says longtime NASA eclipse expert Fred Espinat.
Just confirm again. The term blood moon is also sometimes used to refer to 4 total lunar eclipses that happen in the span of 2 years, a phenomenon astronomers call a lunar tetrad. The eclipses in a tetrad occur about 6 months apart, with at least 5 uneclipsed full moons between them. But Steve Fletcher on his website wanted to warn us about something about what the scientists didn't tell us. A blood moon tetrad is when there are 4 consecutive total lunar eclipses, which all fall on Jewish high holidays. The significance of this history of the blood moon tetrads is not in the fact that there are simple eclipses, but that 4 in a row all fall on Jewish feast days. The world has witnessed 7 tetrads coinciding with events impacting Jewish and Christian culture and history since the time of Christ. Each one is significant, and this is an amazing sign and confirmation that we are on the verge of the return of Christ and the period the Bible calls the Great Tribulation. He wrote this in 2014. Let me show all the 7. 4 total lunar eclipses occurred on the Jewish Passover and Feast of Tabernacles in 162-163 AD, coinciding with the worst persecution of Jews and Christians in the history of the Roman Empire. Within 3 years, the Antiochian plague killed 8 million people, a third of the population. 4 total lunar eclipses occurred on the Jewish Passover and Yom Kippur holidays in 795-796, while King Charlemagne of the Holy Roman Empire established the demilitarized zone, buffer zone between France and Spain, ending centuries of Arab invasions into Western Europe. 4 total lunar eclipses occurred on the Jewish Passover and Yom Kippur holidays in 840-843. Shortly after the eclipses, the Vatican Church in Rome was attacked and looted by an Islamic invasion from Africa. 4 total lunar eclipses occurred on the Jewish Passover and Yom Kippur holidays in 860-861. Shortly after the eclipses, the Byzantine Empire defeated Arab armies at the Battle of Lalakaon in Turkey and permanently stopped the Islamic invasion of Eastern Europe. My comments on this we know from the Bible prophecies the rise and the fall of the Islamic power. 4 total lunar eclipses occurred on the Jewish Passover and the Feast of Trumpets holidays in 1493-1494. Only months after, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain ordered all Jewish people to leave the country. In the same month in which their Majesties, Ferdinand and Isabella, issued the edict that all Jews should be driven out of the kingdom and its territories, in the same month they gave me the order to undertake with sufficient men my expedition of discovery to the Indies. So began Christopher Columbus' diary. The expulsion that Columbus refers to was so cataclysmic an event that ever since, the date 1492 has been almost as important in Jewish history as in American history. On July 30th of that year, the entire Jewish community, some 200,000 people, were expelled from Spain. Tens of thousands of refugees died while trying to reach safely. 1492 was the same year that the Jews were expelled from Spain and Christopher Columbus amazingly discovered America, which is home today for more than 5 million Jews outside Israel. My addition to that, more importantly, we also know from the Bible, America became a safe haven for millions of faithful Christians who were persecuted by the papal power during the Dark Ages. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. 4 total lunar eclipses occurred on the Jewish Passover and the Feast of Tabernacle in 1949-1950 during the First Arab-Israeli War for Independence, just after Israel had become a nation again for the first time in 2,000 years. 4 total lunar eclipses occurred on the Jewish Passover and the Feast of Tabernacles in 1967-1968, coinciding with the Six-Day War when Israel recaptured Jerusalem. As Israel's neighbors prepared to destroy the Jewish state, Israel invoked its inherent right of self-defense, launching a preemptive strikes against Egypt in the south. My comments on this: we can find this verse in the Bible. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolation are determined. So we all should be aware that if Israel became a country, that is only for temporary. And we constantly saw and see wars and conflicts after each other in that area. Prophecy is still fulfilling. But continue with Steve Fletcher again. The summary of the first 7 tetrads since Christ, there is a recurring theme we need to see, a very important recurring theme in each and every tetrad. Did you notice? It has to do with Israel, Rome, or Islam. After this, Mr. Fletcher asked that, what can we expect from the tetrads in 2014-2015? Take a careful look at the 2014-2015 tetrad compared to all the tetrads. See the chart on the screen. Can you see the difference? What is the major difference between this upcoming tetrad and all the rest? Can you see? This upcoming tetrad, according to these charts, is the only time where will be total solar eclipse also in the time frames of the tetrads. Not only one, but two total solar eclipses. Two solar eclipses embedded in the 4 blood moon eclipses to confirm that this world is going to be rocked like never before. The world is about to change forever. We are approaching the final battle for world dominions. Israel and the Church of Gentiles, the nations of Islam and the Roman Catholic Church. What lies ahead is the final solution plans of the New World Order and their hopes for the world dominions through politics, economics and religion. One world government, one world religion, one world currency. This was his study from 2014. Interesting to hear and see that from someone who doesn't apply the prophecies consistently, but definitely a seeking person, and has got some light. Before we start with the events in 2015, let's see another event, but stretch back the time a little bit according to the tetrad lunar eclipse, as it expanded from 2014 to 2015. We will see later why. Do not forget that 2 lunar eclipses happened in 2014 alongside with a very significant event. In January 2014, Tony Palmer, evangelical bishop, was sent by Pope Francis as a special envoy to a charismatic evangelical leadership conference hosted by Kenneth Copeland in the United States.
Everything began in January 2014 with a video message from the Pope, filmed by his friend Tony Palmer, addressed to leaders of the charismatic evangelicals who had gathered for a conference in Texas. This video had a massive impact and was circulated all around the world. It led to a meeting in Rome on the 24th of June between Pope Francis and a delegation of Pentecostal and evangelical leaders, among whom were the televangelist Kenneth Copeland and Jeff Tunnicliffe, Secretary of the World Evangelical Alliance. Tony Palmer had been the catalyst for this unprecedented meeting. However,
Tony Palmer was the one who said these sentences. The miracle of unity has begun. The real gift of communion is finding our brother. For those of us who have ears to hear, let us hear, because this is both profound and revolutionary. Pope Francis is calling us into an authentic communion based on the fact that we are brothers and sisters in Christ, not communion through or common traditions. This is a new way forward. In a fiery speech that set the stage, Palmer read from the 1999 Lutheran Catholic Joint Declaration on the Doctrine of Justification. In that document, the two confessions declared that they share a common understanding of the basis for salvation, and therefore that the central theological disagreement of the Reformation had been resolved. As Palmer put it, the protest is over. But the spirit of prophecy tells us the Protestant Reformation will not be over until Jesus Christ will come back the second time. Tony Palmer died on the 20th of July 2014 after injuries sustained in a motorbike accident. So, what really happened in 2015? A lot, I have to say. Syria refugee crisis connected to war and humanitarian problems. Russia intervenes in Syria. ISIS terrorist strikes on 3 continents. 3 teams of coordinated attackers carried out terrorist strike at 4 locations in Paris, killing 130 people. Terrorists killed 39 and 102 people in Turkey a few months later. On October 31st, a bomb brought down a Russian passenger airplane over the Sinai Peninsula, killing all 224 people on board. And then, on the 2nd of December, a husband and wife who had pledged allegiance to the Islamic State Caliph Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi killed 14 people in a mass shooting in San Bernardino, California. China stock market crash. Turkey-Russia dispute. Tension between the two countries because Turkey shut down a Russian fighter jet. New Greek debt drama. Political deadlock in Spain. The Vatican issued the encyclical Laudato Si, which was the second encyclical of Pope Francis. The encyclical has the subtitle On Care for Our Common Home. In it, the Pope critiques consumerism and irresponsible development, laments environmental degradation and global warming, and calls all the people of the world to take swift and unified global action. The encyclical was written by theologians and environmental experts. The encyclical comprises 6 chapters. In the 6th chapter, the 6 paragraphs talks about sacramental signs and the celebration of rest, the Sunday sacredness. At the end of the year, world leaders reached a landmark agreement on climate change at a massive UN summit in Paris. And 2 more to come. 2015, in San Antonio, the General Conference made 2 very important decisions, but not many recognized the importance of these changes. While all the eyes were focused on the vote on women's ordination, only a few noticed that there were some vital changes made to our fundamental beliefs. For 150 years, we have believed and thought that the spirit of prophecy is a continuous source of truth, for the Church a guiding light, and inspired source of prophetic material that we can use as a guide, just as we use the Bible to give us doctrinal guidance and to help us giving a health message as well. During the 2015 conference, there were 2 proposals made. One is to change the wording so that the spirit of prophecy no longer would be considered a source of light. And the second one was a second coming, the imminent coming of Jesus Christ, which for over 150 years that has been the Advent message, is not imminent anymore. A few days after the General Conference, the White Estate released this document from Ellen G. White the first time. I am now of the opinion that the testimonies will not live among God's people. They will be removed. I have some light on this point, but cannot now give it. Said Christ, I have many things to say unto you, but ye cannot bear them now. In 2015, on the Great Atonement Day, on the 22nd, 23rd of September, the Roman Pope visited the United States. On the 23rd of September, he went to meet with President Barack Obama in the White House. The Pope spoke to a crowd of more than 11,000 people on the White House South Lawn. After that, he was participating in some religious events. On the 24th September, in the United States Capitol building, Pope Francis became the first pope to address a joint session of the United States Congress at the invitation of House Speaker John Boehner and Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, both Catholics. In his speech to Congress and other dignitaries, he devoted most of the time discussing immigration, protection for persecuted religious groups, including Christians, poverty, capital punishment, and climate change. When therefore you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. But when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is at hand. If somebody wouldn't know that, the Pope was standing on a place he shouldn't have to. The Capitol building with the surrounding hill was considered as sacred by the founding fathers. Unlike any other building in Washington, D.C., the United States Capitol is designed to be a symbol of the belief in this country that democracy is a sacred undertaking. His visit was an assault from his religious power with its dark history and a bold attempt to invade the land of freedom. On the 25th of September, he went to New York, the United Nations headquarters, and met the members of the General Assembly of the United Nations organization. He addressed a dramatic message to his audience. After these, he was participating in several events organized mainly religious organizations. He left the United States of America on the 27th of September. The next night, this phenomenon was visible in the sky. The phenomenon could only be observed fully from the American continent. So we started the events with the attack of the Protestant Reformation in 2014, followed by 2 blood moons and stretched over 2015 with the events of the Word. We were talking about our church and the very important visit of the Roman Pope in the United States of America, followed by a blood moon, the last total lunar eclipse from this time period. Many among us in the Seventh-day Adventist churches who believe in Christ's second, even imminent coming, share this view that Jesus is waiting for us to wake up. They acknowledge that we can hasten or delay the proclamation of the gospel, hence his second coming. They believe that it is going to be changed. They think God will start the events with the Sunday law. That is a big mistake. The time for the preparation is already here, spiritually, mentally, physically, even socially. The probation will close on the Seventh-day Adventist first. When the Sunday law will be here, there will be a test of obedience based on our preparedness. We will not be able to start preparation then. It will be too late. There will be time for the rest of the world, but not for us. Now is the time to get spare oil and let the lamp constantly to shine. We are trapped by our preconceived ideas or worldly plans. We are comfortable here thinking that we will go back to normal post-COVID world, back to a sleepy Laodicean state, but is not going to happen. The United States of America has not been the same since 9/11. The world economy has not been the same since 2008. The Protestantism and the Adventism have not been the same since 2015. and the world will not be the same again after this pandemic. A new normal, a new world order will come. Our world is turning to a direction there is no way out from. The political and religious leaders are trying to make desperate efforts to sort out the problems of our planet, but is not going to work. We all know from the Bible. It was prophesied and going to be fulfilled. Just look around what is happening in the politics, the religious world, economy, nature, and society. Yes, exactly 3.5 years later, after the Pope visit, the climate change protest and movement started in Europe and America. They called their protesting events Friday for Future, FFF. The F is the 6th letter in the English alphabet. FFF 666. That was the second attack of the enemy. Did we hear about the laws they will force the climate change agreements? Did we hear about the laws that will slowly restrict working on Sunday? They scared us with the potential pandemic for years. They held a pandemic exercise called Event 201, and the COVID-19 came. They tried to brainwash, manipulate, marginalize, and segregate us with the media until we realized that the fear is the real pandemic. They tried to convince us to offer our body, the temple of the Holy Spirit, to the science for an ominous global experiment goes against the Nuremberg Code. We can hear and read about New Green Deal, Sunday Alliance, Green Sabbath Network, Climate Sunday lockdowns, Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030-2050, COP26 Climate Summit in November this year. Did we hear about the Pope Francis launched the Vatican's 7-year Laudato Si action plan to implement environmental sustainability in different sectors of the church, from religious orders to Catholic schools and hospitals? Do you think he's going to stop here? Of course not. Listen carefully what he says. We need a new ecological approach that can transform our way of dwelling in the world, our styles of life, our relationship with the resources of the earth, and, in general, our way of looking at humanity and of living life. Pope Francis said in a video message on the 24th of May. Was he talking about the Catholic Church only? He has got solution for everything, hasn't he? He deceives the nations of the world. Remember what we can read about the beast power in Revelation 18:23. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. By the way, do you know what the sorceries is? Only the third meaning of the original Greek word pharmacia. Number 1 meaning, the use or administering drugs. Number 2, poisoning. If I remember correctly, he is the one who is pushing this whole world needs to be vaccinated agenda, represented by his man, Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister. Good to be aware when somebody would like to be vaccinated. What about the economy? Everybody says that an economic crisis will come, just a matter of time, unless we implement a major reset. China and the East Caribbean islands going to introduce their digital currency alongside with a surveillance system endangering the value of US dollar, euro, and threatening the global economy. Did we hear about the Great Reset, which will lead to a fusion of our physical, digital, and biological identity? Did we hear about the inclusive capitalism, the Pope and his bankers' initiative, and alliance with the 500 biggest companies all around the world? What about the human rights and persecution of Christians in China, North Korea, and some Islamic states? The World Economic Forum is holding a cyber attack training exercise called Cyber Polygon, similar like a pandemic exercise they held. But the cyber attacks already started to affect us. Can we imagine that? What would be the result if our healthcare, telecommunication, traffic, logistics, transportation, governing information, and global internet systems went down under cyber attacks? What's happening in the nature? Earthquakes, landslides, avalanches, volcanoes. What about the climate change? Extreme droughts, extreme rainfalls, flood, storms, tornadoes, hurricanes, forest and bushfires. The weather-related problems became more frequent and disastrous. What about the famines, pestilences, the family problems, domestic violence, divorces, psychological and psychiatric problems, the increasing number of murder and suicide, the chronic diseases and cancer cases? What about the accidents, calamities by land and sea and in the air? How close we are to the final events. Jesus prophesies that in Matthew 24:7-8 and 34-35. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Many of the Bible scholars agree on that when Jesus said this statement, he didn't apply only for the destruction of Jerusalem. He used this statement for the final events in relation to pain in labor. When the labor pain commenced, the generation who started to experience the disasters will not going to pass until the final events will completely developed and the end will come. How long is one biblical generation? Approximately 40 years. And we know that the labor pains have already started many years ago. Do we have any outside sources we can use to identify when they started? Actually, we have. I like outside sources, especially when they use unknowingly the exact application what was written in the Bible, and especially when it comes from the Catholics. A major international database constantly updating information on natural disasters located in Brussels, Belgium, has followed the signs, excluding wars. The biblical lady in labor trend developed in the era of the ovoid center. After 1982, the line never went back. If we consider these, all that we were talking about, it seems like a great, maybe multi-leveled crisis taking place in front of very eyes, which can be connected to the imminent Sunday law crisis, more pestilences, more famines, economic crisis, climate change related problems, more disasters in the nature, free movement issues without being vaccinated. Only God knows exactly what will happen, because He is the one who is going to allow what he is going to allow based on his timetable. But we have signposts in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, the book of Revelation, and some other places in the Bible. If somebody cannot see that, must be blind, ignorant, or deliberately negligent. We do not know what will happen, but knowing that what happened every 7th year since 1966, something big, significant can happen. We can be skeptic or critically analyzing according to the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, and it's fine. We have to act this way. It is our duty. But do not be cynical, irresponsible, and negligent. How can we, as watchmen, see these signs and be silent? We are Seventh-day Adventists. We have to warn and wake up the entire world. We cannot be blind watchmen, dumb ducks who cannot bark, sleeping, slumbering. It is time to wake up. There is the time now to sigh and cry between the porch and the altar, and to be true and faithful watchmen, to give warnings from God. The silence must be over. We have to stand up and proclaim the everlasting gospel, the three angels' messages, alongside with the health message, which is the right arm of the three angels' messages. The time is at hand. Wake up, friends. The end game is coming in the following years. It is time to give up playing with sin and God. Friends, brothers and sisters, the drama is almost over. We have to give a certain sound with the trumpet. Our duty is to watch, pray, and work. Watch means keep eye on what's happening within the walls and outside the walls. Pray what to do, how to react, and restore the cracks on the walls. I don't want to criticize or judge anyone, but if the things are going to wrong direction within the walls and we see cracks on the walls, they need to be restored. We have to put everything and the people in order to prepare for the coming crisis. Leaders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, theologians and pastors are telling us about faithful watchmen. They have only one goal: to destroy the prestige of the pastors. That is not true, and they don't need to do that. Why? Because a lot of the theologians and pastors coming out to the pulpit with watered down Advent messages and strange obscure doctrines. When they standing at the pulpit, their appearance already revealed that at least 2 or 3 principles from the 8 principles of healthy living are missing from their life, like temperance, exercise, and the correct apply of nutrition. They even not hiding that, still consuming animal products, dairy products, sugary pasties, and beverages, etc. They apparently don't follow the health message properly, and they are in the first in the line to get vaccinated. Of course, because their lifestyle already qualified them to be in a life-threatening danger, not from COVID-19 only, any kind of inflammations and chronic diseases, even cancer. Meanwhile, the children of world, atheists and evolutionists released hundreds of studies and books about the healthy living, using the Adventist researches as significant evidences they underpinning our New Start Health program based on the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. How ironic it is. Please, I'm asking you, work and act according to the Bible, the testimonies of the spirit of prophecy. Get ready and keep yourself busy on the mission field. This is our call of duty. God needs active, faithful leaders, theologians, pastors, healthcare workers, and church members. Everybody can do some work. Hence, everybody must do some work, and God will multiply the effort. As a healthcare professional, I cannot detach myself from the health message. Let me close this program with 2 Ellen G. White quotations. Perilous times are before us. The whole world will be involved in perplexity and distress. Disease of every kind will be upon the human family, and such ignorance as now prevails concerning the laws of health would result in great suffering and the loss of many lives that might be saved. God reaches hard through the relief of physical suffering. A seed of truth is dropped into the mind and is watered by God. Much patience may be required before the seed shows signs of life, but at last it springs up and bears fruit unto eternal life. The time of trouble, such as never was, is soon to open upon us, and we shall need an experience which we do not now possess, and which many are too indolent to obtain. It is often the case that the trouble is greater to anticipation than in reality, but this is not true of the crisis before us. The most vivid presentation cannot reach the magnitude of the ordeal. In that time of trial, every soul must stand for himself before God. Thus Noah, Daniel, and Job were in the land, as I live, saith the Lord God. They shall deliver neither son nor daughter, they shall but deliver their own souls by their righteousness. Those who place themselves under God's control, to be led and guided by Him, will catch the steady thread of the events ordained by Him to take place. Inspired with the Spirit of Him who gave His life for the life of the world, they will no longer stand still in impotency, pointing to what they cannot do. Putting on the armor of heaven, they will go forth to the warfare, willing to do and bear for God, knowing that His omnipotence will supply their need. After these, only one unanswered question remained in our program, and I am pretty sure some of you already been thinking about that. What was in the sermon I was listening to when I was hit by the car? Well, one of the 7 blessings in the book of Revelation is, "Blessed are he dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yeah, say the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them." I know I didn't have enough good works to be enough for the judgment, even with God's mercy, to stay in the book of life. I wasn't ready. How about you, my friend? But God was and is merciful and ensure us. "For I have no pleasure in the death of him that dieth, says the Lord God. Wherefore turn yourself and live ye." He knows that and revealed in His word. He is not the God of dead, but the God of the living. For the grave cannot praise thee, death cannot celebrate thee. They that go down in the pit cannot hope for thy truth. The living the living, he shall praise thee, as I do this day. May God give strength to all of us to achieve the victory. Thank you for watching and listening to our special First International program.